Murder. The unlawful killing of another living, breathing human being. Or, as was the case on April 19, 1995, on a cool, crisp spring morning in downtown Oklahoma City, 168 living, breathing human beings. On this season of A Murderous Design, we'll study what may be the largest circumstantial evidence trial ever heard in an American courtroom, the United States of America versus Timothy James McVeigh. Based on the authentic trial transcripts and interviews with those who tried the case, we will uncover the author responsible for the formation and execution of A Murderous Design. I'm Brandon Birmingham. This is Timothy James McVeigh versus the USA. A Marine woke up before dawn and drove his 1992 Ford Ranger north from his home in Allen, Texas, just north of Dallas. Just before 9 a.m., he walked through the lobby onto the elevator, heading upstairs to his office. He talked with a friend of his who asked him to make a phone call and check the status of a promotion, but the line was busy. He told his friend he'd be back in 5 minutes. He walked to the next office over and was about to say good morning to another friend when a blast threw him against the wall. The day? April 19th, 1995. It was 9:02 a.m. His office was on the 6th floor of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. His nose broke, his skull fractured, but he survived. For this Marine named Michael, a busy signal saved his life. At daybreak, Ann told her 18-month-old little boy to go wake up Sissy, and he followed the command in the best way little toddlers know how, by hitting his kindergarten-age sister with his little plastic toy vase. She never got mad, though. Big sisters have a way of tolerating their little brothers. Ann played airplane with them as they set out to get ready for the day, and as so often happens when trying to corral little ones for the day, they were running late for daycare. The patient sister told her mother that she didn't want to go to daycare, though, because they were going to practice their kindergarten graduation ceremony at her school, and Ann relented and let her skip daycare. Ann dropped her 18-month-old off at the daycare in Murrah and left for her office across the street. Now, Murrah's entire north side is made of glass. The second floor housed the daycare. A driveway for cars and delivery runs adjacent to Murrah on 5th Street, and if you stood on 5th Street in that driveway and looked up, you could see children running around and playing. Sometimes they'd put their little hands against the window, and on her way to her office, Ann did as she normally did, and paused to take a look back through the windows on the 2nd floor, and there he was, her little boy in the arms of one of the daycare workers. It was the last time she would see him. An hour later, he was gone. He was one of 18 children and daycare workers killed that morning, so for Ann's daughter, it was kindergarten graduation. Susan paused and joked with another co-worker about having to hurry to catch her friend and assistant Frida before her smoke break, and just as she made it to Frida's desk, the bomb went off. That little joke saved her life. For Ryan, it was a slideshow. He got a cup of coffee from the community coffee pot at the Department of Agriculture and found a dark, empty conference room at the end of the hall that provided the perfect place to put together a presentation. That's when the dark room suddenly became light. For Martin in the United States Army, it was a conference call with recruiters. For Eric in the Social Security Administration, it was stopping to help a colleague compose a letter on a typewriter. For Lawrence with the Secret Service on the 9th floor, it was an 8:45 court appearance at the federal courthouse across the street. For Florence, the CEO of the Federal Credit Union, an empty printer cartridge caused her to move her meeting from a conference room to her office. There were many others, of course. For every tale where a coffee run or a printer cartridge equated into survival, there were 168 others where the same fates conspired for death. For those that happened to live through the initial blast, their survival now depended on escaping the jagged labyrinth of rebar, drywall, and concrete of the grotesquely reconfigured office building they once toiled in every day. Luke worked for the ATF and was assigned to Murrah. Two of the agents he worked with actually helped serve a warrant during the 1993 siege of the Branch Davidian compound near Waco. He was on the phone with another agent seeking an arrest warrant when he heard and felt a loud bang. everything came apart. In a blur, the walls collapsed, the ceiling fell down, and a fluorescent light fixture hit him. He found a handheld radio in the rubble and called out for help, but his attempts proved to be fruitless. He was met only with the screams of his colleagues. He did find a poster board among the damage and wrote a sign for help in black marker on the white part of the poster board. ATF trapped, 9th floor. He was trapped there for about an hour waiting when he heard alarming screams from the floors below. He looked out a crevice and saw rescuers scurrying away from the building, agonizingly concluding that they were running because there must be a second bomb. Quote, "It was like someone reached in and grabbed my heart and squished it because I had nowhere to go if there was another bomb. I didn't think I could do anything about it. I was scared, very scared." End quote. Once the mind concludes a set of circumstances will lead to certain demise, unthinkable decisions must be made, and in that moment Luke decided, "I would rather die falling off the building than go through another explosion." So he decided to make a risky attempt at an escape that would lead him outside of the building. Quote, "So I started kicking a hole through the wall to get through. I crawled over some rubble and proceeded down the window ledge on the outside of the building, and I tried not to look down. Holding on to window frames, concrete and steel, he scooted for safety, unsecured, 90 feet in the air. He came to the end, spotting a ledge separated from him by nothing more than smoke, ash, and, 9 stories of nothing. Left with no choice, he jumped over all that empty space and landed safely and found a stairwell. Still under the impression he was risking a bomb, he got out as fast as he could. Quote, "I remember sliding down the stairwell, and it was covered in blood. I made it to the bottom floor, and I finally came out." He survived. The line between survival and peril isn't black and white. Along the way, able-bodied survivors encountered the wounded in the gray area between life and death. Priscilla worked for the Secret Service. She was on the phone, and one of her colleagues stood behind her, looking over her shoulder at a file they were working on. She heard an extraordinary push from behind, felt herself tumbling, and came to rest. She wasn't sure where. She only knew that it was somewhere else, somewhere where the air was heavy, somewhere where her head was trapped. It was hard to breathe and deathly quiet. She heard a voice say, "This is the child care center," but she thought to herself, "Now why would they say that? That's on the 2nd floor. I work on the 5th. Someone must have seen her. "We have a live one here," they screamed, and she felt someone grab her left hand and promise to get her out. "We'll be back," he said. She mustered a whispered protest, "Please don't leave me." The man couldn't get her out barehanded, though. He needed some tools. "I'm sorry," he explained, and he had to leave. She was alone again and remained so for the next couple hours, 3 floors below her desk. Now, true to his word, the man came back, and unlike her colleague who was helping her with the file, she did survive. Priscilla's rescuer is a man named Mike Shannon. He served in the Navy as a young man and, like his father and uncle, became a firefighter. By April 19th of 1995, he had risen through the ranks of 1,000 other firefighters to become a 2nd Bugle Chief, 4th overall in the command of the Oklahoma Fire Department. He was 5 blocks away when the explosion happened. Grabbing his self-breathing apparatus on his way, he headed for Murrah. He would eventually become the Chief of Rescue Operations, a hero trying to tame the unstable beast Murrah became from within its belly. The assignment caused him to be pulled in one of 2 directions: duty to the survivors on one side and responsibility to his team of rescuers on the other. You'll recall the agonizing conclusion Luke, the ATF agent, drew that there must have been a second bomb because rescuers were scurrying away from the building. Well, it turns out that another ATF agent had a black spherical ornamental clock for his desk, shaped like the bombs we've all seen in movies and cartoons, and this little clock ticked. And after the explosion, the ticking clock rolled into a stairwell. People saw it, and word quickly traveled. Shannon's responsibility was first to make sure that the rescuers would live to rescue another day, to return only when the area was safe. And on that occasion, when he received word about a second bomb ticking in the stairwell, he made an agonizing decision of his own. He told his rescuers to leave. They protested, begged, and pleaded to stay, but his responsibilities to his rescuers won out, and they had to leave the rubble until it was safe. It was a decision made with full knowledge that victims remained in the belly. He made sure he remembered where they were, making mental notes, because he was coming back. Duty one way, responsibility the other. Rescuers faced three major problems, according to Mike Shannon. The first he termed the fall and included things like computers, lights, and chairs. The second was the collapse. Steel and concrete jarred loose from their anchors of origin in the building. Their weight caused them to collapse on top of each other, and this collapse caused what he termed the pancake. All the things in an office, the computers, the furniture, the chairs, the cabinets, they were crushed into a very small space, a space that he measured as that between his hand and his elbow. Shannon calls this the grape effect. And the gravity-induced dripping fluid caused significant problem number 3 for rescuers, biological hazards. Things in the beginning were chaotic, to say the least. Shannon and his team didn't have access to a floor plan or a blueprint. They were in the building, but they didn't know precisely where, nor did they know how many people they were looking for. Quote, "It was like trying to find needles in the haystack, but you don't know how many needles there are, and if you picked the wrong straw from the stack, you'd cause further damage," end quote. That was Mike Shannon. The spaces were excruciatingly small and narrow, forcing rescuers to crawl through random suffocating burrows. In order to clear debris along the way, the leader would pass the debris under his or her belly to the next person in line, and then to the third and on down the line, piece by piece, inch by inch, working their way through this tumultuous pile of pixie sticks. The dust from the fallen drywall made it nearly impossible to discern figures. A graphics specialist named Danny Atchley heard groans and looked around helplessly. The dust was so thick it perfectly camouflaged a child until he opened his eyes. Oklahoma City Police Sergeant Avera heard a woman's voice and the dry cry of a baby. He and some others that were in this rescue operation lifted up some of the debris and located the source. He handed the child to Sergeant Helmuth, who took the child away for help. Sergeant Avera found another child. He ran out of the building searching for help. He found a fireman named Chris Fields and handed him the baby. Her name was Bailey. The exchange was caught by amateur photographer Chuck Porter in the very famous and future Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph we've all seen. And that's how it was for the first 4 or 5 days, trying to bring order to chaos, moving straws in a haystack, hoping against hope not to pick the wrong one while praying for needles. On day 6, Mike Shannon and his team of rescuers, they caught a break. Many from the medical examiner's office and police department had been interviewing witnesses for the habits, the routines, and the clothes of the missing who worked in and around the building. Based on this, Todd Ellis and Chuck Smith, medical examiners from Texas and Louisiana, respectively, created and shared a map with rescuers. It was a blueprint with numbered circular overlays corresponding to various expected locations of personnel. Rescuers then set about clearing those areas and locations, and once cleared, Shannon didn't have to subject his rescuers anymore to falling debris, fluid, or any other hazards. And this brings us to the very stark reality of dealing with mass casualties like this one. How do you properly account for the departed? In-person identification was one way, fingerprints another. Employees who did survive had the unenviable task of identifying the bodies of their colleagues at a makeshift trauma center at a nearby hotel. Family members collected dental records and household items like coffee cups and hairbrushes so fingerprint experts could lift samples to identify victims that way. For little Tevin, the 18-month-old with the vase, it was the Mickey Mouse picture that hung over his bed, his high chair, and the glass on his mother's stereo door. For some of the missing, the identification process took a week and a half. On May 5th, 1995, the search and rescue operation officially came to an end. Richard Williams used to manage all of the federal buildings in Oklahoma. In the 70s and 80s, that included the Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City, situated between Robinson and Harvey Streets on Northwest 5th, and it was owned by the U.S. government. It housed a number of federal agencies, as you've heard, including the Army, Health and Human Services, the Federal Credit Union, the Federal Highway Administration, the Department of Agriculture, of course the Marines. The busiest time of the day was 9 a.m. When the dust cleared, Murrah's bite mark was 9 stories deep, falling into what rescuers referred to as the pit or the cave. The explosion sheared off the enormous support columns. The 40,000-ton concrete slab that rescuers called the mother slab anchored the entire building and collapsed, causing all the floors to pancake beneath it, as we've described. All told, there were 7,000 square feet of rubble. That's 55,000 square feet of office space compressed into 7,000. The question facing investigators at that point became determining what type of instrument could have caused that kind of damage. In every murder case, some weapon is used that causes some specific type of mortal damage. The weapon could be anything: hands, the ground, a gun, a sword, poison. The forensic pathologist is charged with conducting an autopsy of the victim so as to determine the cause and manner of death. In conducting their analysis of the body externally and internally, at least in the normal murder case, they examine any wounds in their connected paths. The appearance and characteristics of these wounds guide the forensic pathologist in making conclusions about the type of weapon that caused the wound. The more unique the type of weapon used, the more specifically a weapon can be identified. The more uniquely identifiable the weapon, the more focused the investigation can potentially become. That's the reason it becomes necessary to try and determine that a wound was caused not just by a sharp object, for example, but by a single-edged sharp object of some approximate size. It also becomes necessary to look for and collect the remnants or component parts of the weapon. The most common, of course, is a bullet recovered in a victim's body during the autopsy. If a gun is recovered during the course of the investigation, forensic analysts can potentially determine if the recovered gun fired that bullet. The same could be said for the broken blade of a knife recovered during an autopsy. If the knife is recovered during the investigation, forensic analysts can possibly determine whether the broken blade fits the knife. Although poison is unlike a knife blade or a bullet in that it doesn't cause impact-type damage, remnants of poison can still be discovered during autopsy and subsequently analyzed by chemists. In whatever form, once the type, size, and individual characteristics of a weapon is determined and any remnants from it collected, the investigation turns to finding out who possessed it with the ability to use it at the time of the killing. In this way, the analysis of the damage to Murrah is exactly like an autopsy in a murder case. The type of weapon needs to be identified as specifically as possible, and remnants of it need to be collected for future analysis. Once completed, the investigation would progress into proving who possessed it with the ability to use it at the time of the killing. The autopsy of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. Dr. Linda Jones would conduct Murrah's autopsy with photographs and blueprints, not scalpels and forceps. She's part of the Ministry of Defense in England, working in the Forensic Explosive Lab. For her work in this field, Her Majesty, the Queen of England, appointed her to be an officer of the British Empire. She is an explosives expert, having studied and examined all types of explosions, both in the lab and in the field. She explains that an improvised explosive device, or homemade bomb, has different components, including an explosive, a blasting agent, and a detonator. Once detonated, a massive fireball emanates from the explosive device, followed by a blast wave. The emerging pattern of destruction is called the dispersion pattern. The type and quantity and ratio of the explosive chemicals determine the speed of the explosion and the dispersion pattern. Speeds can range from 9,000 feet to 16,000 feet per second. For Dr. Jones, the dispersion pattern shown in aerial photographs surrounding the bite mark indicated that the blast was shaped or directed into the building from the center of the observable crater on 5th Street. Further, the building appeared to have been sheared, not disintegrated. Mid-range or mid-velocity explosives create damage like that. That's why they're used in rock quarries to shear large rock structures into sheets instead of pebbles. Cars parked near Murrah were pushed back away from the building, and their hoods were pushed inwards towards the windshield. Also of note, the cars were not shattered. She concluded that the mortal instrument, therefore, was one mid-range velocity homemade explosive device containing approximately 3,000 to 6,000 pounds of explosives, detonated in front of the building on 5th Street, shaped in an easterly direction directly into Murrah. The resulting damage gave investigators insight into the chemical makeup of the bomb. Additionally, since all these explosive chemicals were delivered to that spot in front of Murrah at some point, obviously prior to the detonation, investigators needed to determine how. PVA 26077. Richard Nichols is the maintenance worker at Regency Tower Apartments and got to work at 7 a.m. on the 19th. He was to meet his wife to take their little nephew, Chad, to the doctor. His departure was delayed a few minutes when he struck up a conversation with a coworker. Just before 9 a.m., he walked outside onto 5th Street to meet his wife when he heard the explosion. He heard what he described as a humongous object coming out of the air, quote, spinning like a boomerang. A large object came straight for him in his car. He grabbed his wife and nephew and ran away, guarding them like a mother hen, he said. It was a good thing, too. The large object nearly beheaded him on his way to crashing on top of his 1990 red Ford Festiva, crushing its hood.
Frankly, as I've often said, the single best or the single most important piece of evidence in this case fell out of the sky.
It was a large axle to a vehicle. The axle weighed some 250 pounds. It was 575 feet from Murrah's bite mark. Etched on the axle, PVA 26077. It's called a vehicle identification number, and this one had quite a story to tell. There is a public VIN number on the driver's side windshield of every motor vehicle, 17 characters in length. A confidential VIN consists of at least 8 of those 17 characters and is stamped on different parts of the car. Since investigators knew the confidential VIN from the axle, they were able to learn the full VIN. The first 3 digits, IFD, mean the work manufacturing number. Each of the next 5, NF72J, correspond to certain attributes of the vehicle itself. The middle 4 is referred to as a check digit, a number used by manufacturers in North America to validate the VIN itself. The next 2 digits, the letters P and V, mean the vehicle was built in 1993 at Ford's manufacturing plant in Louisville, Kentucky. The following A means that it's a heavy truck weighing more than a passenger truck but less than 100,000 pounds. And the final 5 digits, 26077, that's called a sequential component number. It is the number assigned to the truck as it's rolled off the assembly line. The one before it was 26076, the one after 26078. From that axle, investigators knew that Ford manufactured the truck between February 15th and February 25th of 1993. The National Insurance Crime Bureau's office in Dallas, and they keep track of all the registrations, at least they did back then. And this Ford 700 had a 20-foot body and belonged to Ryder. At the Ryder headquarters in Miami, Florida, Clark Anderson answered the phone. It was the FBI. They were inquiring about possible rentals of this particular truck, 26077. In his records, Anderson matched the VIN number to a lease agreement number 137-328 made at Elliott's Body Shop in Junction City, Kansas. The truck was rented to a Mr. Robert Kling.
That projectile was a 300-pound axle off the bomb truck. And that was the start of the trail to find out who caused the blast.
Eldon Elliott runs a number of businesses in Junction City, one of which is a body shop off the frontage road running parallel with I-70 on Golden Belt Boulevard. On April 14, 1995, he quoted a price for a 20-foot Ryder truck to a man named Robert Kling. It was a one-way request. Although the customer didn't request insurance, he did request a device used to help move heavy objects called a hand truck. The quote came to $200.32. The truck was to be picked up 3 days later on April 17th. In order to finalize the deal, the customer had to pay up front. So the next day, April 15th, at about 9 a.m., the customer walked into the body shop to pay the rental fee. He identified himself as Robert Kling. He declined insurance, saying he wasn't going far, to Omaha and then to Iowa. Besides, he said he was a good driver because he, quote, drove those deuce and a halfs at Fort Riley, a nearby Army base. Elliott described the customer as a white male somewhere between 5'10 and 5'11, cleanly shaven, skinny, and possibly wearing camouflage. Kling wasn't alone that day. He was with another person described as a white male, 5'7" to 5'8", wearing a white baseball cap with 3 prominent stripes. On Monday the 17th, 2 days later, at about 4:15 p.m., this Robert Kling picked up the rental. The address on Kling's driver's license was 428 Mile Drive in Redfield, South Dakota. Date of birth, 4/19/1970. Mr. Elliott took the money and performed a customary inspection. Once finished, the parties finalized the agreement. Elliott listed the VIN number on the lease agreement, and Robert D. Kling signed off. Elliott, Vicky Beamer, and another co-worker named Tom Kessinger relayed their descriptions to a forensic sketch artist for the FBI named Raymond Rozicki. After receiving their description, he goes over an FBI facial catalog with them. Witnesses choose facial characteristics from the catalog that match their memory of the questioned individual. Based on all this, Rozicki makes his sketches. From Rozicki's hands, the world saw for the very first time two people that could be responsible for this bombing: John Doe Number 1 and John Doe Number 2.
Law enforcement agencies, of course, knew Junction City is a hot spot. And so they started working their way through the hotels in the area.
On the next episode of A Murderous Design, we'll learn how a nationwide manhunt led to the Noble County Courthouse in Oklahoma. We'll go through McVeigh's background in military service, and we'll learn his worldview from his own words and the ever-important letters he wrote. Thank you for listening to the show. You can find all kinds of information, interactive maps, and a trial visualization report on amurderousdesign.com. I'm lucky enough to share with you throughout the entire series the words of one of the lead prosecutors.
Good afternoon. I'm Larry Mackey. I'm a lunch bucket lawyer from Indiana.
Mr. Mackey also provided the clip of the recording of the water rights hearing you heard at the beginning of the show and on the introduction. McVeigh's lead attorney.
My name is Stephen Jones. I'm a lawyer in Oklahoma. I live in Enid, Oklahoma.
And his co-counsel, Christopher Tritico.
He said, well, Stephen Jones called me. He's Tim McVeigh's lawyer, and he asked me to recommend a trial lawyer, and I'm going to recommend you.
Whose task was to handle all of the forensic testing during the trial. Their full interviews are also available in later episodes. New York Times best-selling author and journalist for the Buffalo News in New York, Lou Michel.
Walked up the gravel driveway. I can still hear the crunch of the gravel against my shoes. Knocked on the door.
He interviewed McVeigh at great length and shares some of his experiences in our final episode. The entire transcript of the trial is available on theoklahoman.com for free, broken out by morning and afternoon session, including jury selection. Visit their website and search OKC Bombing Trial, and you'll be led to it. I'm Brandon Birmingham. Thank you for joining us, and please visit amurderousdesign.com for some fascinating materials on this trial.